All right, guys. Howdy. My name is Mitchell Hill. Um, ALEC 601 this spring of 2017. This is my PowerPoint, my presentation for Module 4 on motivating students to learn. This topic is very interesting to me in regards to that I deal with this on a regular basis uh, in my teaching um, at the high school at Belton where I teach at. Uh, this is something that I'm kind of passionate about. And I actually get the idea of motivating students to learn. So that's just a little bit how I am. Graduated in the spring of 2015. This is my last semester at A&M, so this will be a good PowerPoint to end something on. Objectives this evening are to explain why student motivation is important, list factors that influence motivation, list two types of student motivation, and lastly, explain how you would implement student motivation in regards to in a teaching scenario, whether you were uh, teaching adult education or you were teaching high school, elementary. Really, guys, motivation has to do with any type of education setting, type of learning setting. For instance, so um, think about a time when you're motivated in high school or college to learn. Um, this is one of the questions that popped up when I thought about motivation. When was a time in my education career that I was motivated to learn? I would say probably, for example, in high school, the biggest thing was to be able to show livestock. You had to pass all your classes, so that's something that motivated me in regards to the idea behind motivation. I'll get to those two types here in just a little bit, but um, that's what factors were present were, for example, for mine was necessarily in regards to showing livestock, just to pass all my classes just to show livestock. Um, so if you will, everyone think about a time they're motivated and think about these questions that I kind of asked myself. What factors were present? Um, in terms of what was at stake, what factors, what teaching methods were used, what was the teacher using, what did they use to motivate you? Was it um, was it a reward or something along those lines? Was it they were enthusiastic, in a teaching method? Necessarily, was it project based? What was it that kind of interests you? What is intrinsic and extrinsic? Those are the two types that I'll go over in just a few minutes, but those are two that have to deal with motivation a lot, and they're very, very self-sufficient in terms of the definition behind those, and they're very, very accurate. So, was it inquiry based? Was it necessarily, did they give you a scenario and say, hey, it's all about you? You try to figure it out. Was it a project necessarily? Project based, inquiry based, somewhat the same thing in regards to inquiry based is necessarily, sorry, you get a scenario and you try to figure it out. You don't necessarily get instructions or directions on what to do. You just kind of jump into it hands on and try to figure out what's going on, what the problem is, and try to figure out how to get something accomplished. Necessarily project based, you're going to relatively get an idea or get a project, and you're going to go on and you're going to try to you're going to have a set project to do, and then finish that out, whether it be a science project, a livestock project, whatever it is. Um, why is student motivation important? uh, Guys, student motivation has a very big importance in the education realm of things. Students who are not motivated will not learn effectively. They won't retain information, they won't participate, and some of them may even become disruptive. Guys, in my teaching career, which 3 years, um, you've got to have students motivated, whether it's students or adults, any type of learning atmosphere. Motivation is very, very important in terms of getting them to retain the information. So, like I said, they're not going to learn effective if they're not motivated. It's probably one of the biggest things in education is motivation, but it also, guys, is very, it can be very hard at times on certain students. Uh, like I said, they won't retain the information if they're not motivated. They won't participate, and if they won't participate, you're really going nowhere in terms of your lesson or whatever it may be. So that's a very, very big, important part of this. Um, some of them may even become disruptive, guys, in education. Just in the few years I've done it, if they're not motivated and they're not engaged in what's going on, they can get disruptive in terms of trying to distract others, putting attention to themselves, and so forth. So having all students motivated is probably the biggest idea behind student motivation. One or two, yes, that's good, but you need to find a way to incorporate all students to get motivated. So therefore, design lessons that are relatively put forth to get all students motivated. And we'll go. General definition of motivation, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a general desire, willingness of someone to do something. You guys, y'all know what the definition of motivation is. It's nothing new. Uh, Motivating force, stimulus, or influence. You're trying to influence someone, some student, some adult, whatever it may be, to force them to, in education, to learn. Okay, so motivation this is just a general definition of motivation. Theoretical foundations behind this. Um, there is many theoretical foundations, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs is probably the best representation of the theory on student motivation. It goes up in it's got 5 levels, psychological, safety, belonging, self-esteem or esteem, accusation. So they always start with level 1, which psychological, and then it goes down to level 5. If you can, this chart that I have made, it shows a good representation. It shows a definition out to the side. Um, so psychological, the needs must be met in order for a person to survive, such as food, water, shelter. Motivation you've got to establish those psychological before anything else can happen. So it has to start at level 1, and nothing can happen after that until those have those goals have been reached in terms of psychological safety, belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. 2, safety, including personal, financial security, health, well-being. You got to feel safe. The student has got to feel safe, whatever atmosphere it's in. That's a classroom atmosphere. That's a good representation of safety and belonging. Need for friendships, relationships in the family. Uh, Relationships necessarily do not have to mean family in regards to education. Have a relationship with a student necessarily could mean that uh, you're on good terms with that student. You get along with the student necessarily in regards to motivation. You're motivating that student, and that student respects you. That's a good relationship with a student. You respecting a student, them respecting you. Esteem, the need to feel confident and be respected by others. Um, you know, feel confident in education. The student needs to feel confident in terms of whatever project or whatever uh, you know in their self. They need to feel confident in everything that they're doing in regards to be motivated externally from somewhat. Self-actualization, desire to achieve everything you possibly can and become the most that you can be. Um, that's trying to rise to the top. You're trying to get there. So therefore, this is just a chart that goes over the few that that I've talked about. Like I said, uh, what you need to get out of this is it starts at level 1 psychological and goes all the way through level 5 self-actualization, and level 1 has to happen first. 2 types of motivation, just like in one of the objectives. You'll need to know these: intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is a type of motivating where you get pleasure for yourself, getting a desire for doing it. it's coming from yourself. It's coming from within. You're motivated based on yourself. You're getting pleasure from it. Um, Desire is a good example of this. For example, reading a book because you enjoy it. This is the best example I could really think of in terms of intrinsic motivation. Um, you're going to read a book because it's what you want to do. It's you feel the need that you get enjoyment out of reading. No one else is getting enjoyment out of it. You're not doing it for anyone else. You're doing this for yourself mainly. Uh, Extrinsic motivation. This is what a lot of students have got to get motivated by. This is a very, very common one. You're going to seek results as an external reward or outcome. You're trying to get reward from something that's, you know, tangible. For instance, for example, playing high school sports for scholarships. You're going to play a high school sport. You're going to do something in regards to get a prize, get a reward. I guess another example of this would be um, only showing livestock to get the money. Okay, you're working hard, you're motivated, whatever it may be, just because you want to get a scholarship or get money for that animal. The biggest one that we have is example that I would like to share is an FFA officer. That FFA officer during officer elections, need to go through a interview process, a test, and so forth. So the only reason they want to study, relatively, they wouldn't study just for their own well-being. So therefore, they're only going to study that because they want that officer position. So they're going to study the manual, they're going to study the test, they're going to do, whatever it may be to prepare for the interview process and so forth. So that's the example of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. They're two of the two types of motivating factors. Factors that influence motivation: intrinsic, extrinsic. Went through that. Intrinsic desire, extrinsic rewards. The biggest one of the biggest. It's not the biggest. One of the biggest is classroom climate. Is your classroom safe? Just like Maslow's hierarchy says, is your classroom safe? Do the kids feel comfortable in that classroom? Is it welcoming? Is it whatever it may be in terms of classroom climate wise for motivation? Types of instructional methods. How are you teaching those? Are you project based? Are you inquiry based? Are you lecture or whatever it may be? So types of teaching methods, for instance. Expectations. Expectations play a really big factor in regards to motivation, because if you set expectations at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of a lesson, or at the beginning of whatever it may be, in terms of uh, motivating someone, uh, your outcome would be enhanced because you've set forth expectations to further process in the motivating process. Clear communications is a real big one. I focus these on teaching in a high school setting, whether it be, and it doesn't necessarily have to be only in a high school setting. It can be in other areas, but communicating clearly with students, adults, whatever it may be, is a very important factor in regards to motivation. This is a picture that I got, and student motivation is built off of teachers. What um, you could say a lot of things in this, but I would say student motivation is built off teachers' enthusiasm. If a teacher is enthusiastic about a subject or enthusiastic about whatever they're teaching or whatever lesson is, those students are going to become more motivated to retain the information, more motivated in listening to that teacher. Um, if you're excited about a subject, if you're excited about a lesson, your students will be more apt to take what's going on and keep going and roll with it. So, like I said, they're going to build off your enthusiasm. They're going to build off of you. They're going to build off your self-esteem too. If you come in down to a classroom every day, if you come in, sad and angry, they're going to build off of that. Implementing student motivation. So how to implement these in a classroom setting. How would you take what I've went over, and how would you put that into real life scenarios? Um, One way to do this is classroom environment. Make sure your classroom environment's first safe, just like I said. Um, make sure it's welcoming. Make sure it's a good learning atmosphere. State goals and expectations. State the goals, state your expectations, state your objectives, whatever it may be at the beginning of it, and you'll have less problems later on. Teaching methods, teacher enthusiasm, just like I said, the way you teach things, the methods that you use are big factors in regards to motivating students. Make lessons relevant to their lives. This is probably one of the biggest ones that I've found that really works in motivating students is, make it apt to them. Give it, put it in a way that they can see that lesson and they can take that and run with it as, they can use that in their everyday life. They see this, they get to take it home and relatively, they can see it firsthand. Give students options while challenging them. Give them the option of, you don't want to give them too much leeway, but you want to give them enough options where you're communicating clear with those students as well, but you're also giving them the option to take an alternate route, think outside the box. So that's a good one. Give your students option, but you don't want to, give them too much leeway where you're not necessarily challenging them. Uh, Communicating, like I said, communication is a very important factor in trying to motivate someone. Encourage students, encourage them, talk them up, um, and that goes back to relationships. Having a relationship with the student relatively encourages students, um, take care of them, for instance, So those are the factors uh, that I would say I would implement, how to implement student motivation. These are relatively based on my career and what I've actually seen. So there's other ways to implement this, but I would say these are the top ones that I would use. You guys for